This is Celestina, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Saturn return for Saturn in Sagittarius. I'll focus primarily and refer primarily to the first Saturn return, but the same issues that came up in your first Saturn return are extended into your second, so you should find the information still relevant. I'm basically going to be reading to you from the information available on my website, yoursaturnreturn.net. The dates for the latest Saturn return, for those with Saturn in Sagittarius, are December 2014 through December 2017. Off and on, there are times when Saturn passes out of Sagittarius, and the specific dates are available on my website, which is yoursaturnreturn.net. If you were born with Saturn in Sagittarius, the issues during your Saturn return will be about personal freedom, higher education, intuition, teaching, travel, the outdoors, mental health, animals, and even home. The karmic wounds indicated for those with Saturn in Sagittarius have to do with religious principles, belief systems, search for the truth, misuse of influence, hypocrisy, and the proper use of the Sagittarius archetype. Someone with Saturn in Sagittarius cries out for the development of a coherent philosophy of life. The freshest, most valuable insights will come from your own contemplation. Though you may be interested in philosophy and benefit a great deal from studying it, there's really little that others have to teach you about life. You must experience it from yourself and come to your own conclusions. People with Saturn in Sagittarius often have a feeling of lack of faith and optimism based on the characteristics of their father. Perhaps he immigrated, was unstable in some way, or didn't really belong anywhere. Maybe a mixed heritage or unusual religious beliefs caused problems for him, or for you, or perhaps he renounced a religion altogether. It's likely that your relationship with your biological father and/or your heavenly one have blocked you from experiencing the breadth of life that you really desire deep down inside. Saturn in Sagittarius makes you a powerful knower and a conveyor of the truth, yet you have many inhibitions about this based on mistakes made in past lives or things used against you in childhood. Perhaps, for example, you encouraged others to take a leap of faith based on your intuition, and it led to disaster, and now you're afraid to tap into that energy again, to say anything at all about what you know about the future. You want to be fully intuitive, and you long to take those big leaps of faith, but you must share what you know responsibly to avoid disaster. A lot of testing is required before you're able to properly access this powerful gift. Remember that you have to earn the energy of your Saturn by showing careful, stable progress in mastering it. There is a residual tendency to both balk at the starting gate and to rush success at the same time. The biggest mistake of all is to rein in your horse just as it is jumping. This process smooths out over time, i.e., as you get older, and rewards come fully after your second Saturn return, which usually occurs around the age of 56. In fact, for you, many rewards come later. At the end of your life, you have the greatest blessing of all, which is a rare one. It's called the blessing of Buddha, knowing that you did what you came here to do. You would love to be enthusiastic and positive about life, to see it as a grand adventure. You would love to nurture others and yourself with optimism and greatness, and with a belief in the beautiful goodness of the Creator and of life itself. You long to be in the flow, in higher states of consciousness, and in communication with your higher mind and that of those around you. You're attracted to meditation and prophecy, anything which helps you foretell the future and to tap into the universal mind. Ultimately, you wish to travel far and wide, learning everything there is to know about the world, its geography, its people, languages, cultures, myths, religions, and beliefs, and to travel backward and forward in time as well, checking everything out as you go and connecting the dots. It may be that there's a cage you've been keeping yourself in all these years, and now you're searching for the key to let yourself out. These are things it's appropriate for you to achieve, if you will, but pursue them slowly, step by step, being willing to learn and relearn as you go. In a world full of goodness and prosperity, such as you have been used to in past lives, all things are possible, at least in theory. People who are positive seem to live longer, achieve more, experience more, and are luckier than the rest of us. Something tells you all these things are yours. It tells me too, and they are. but you must earn them. What you are looking for is a never-ending and reliable source of positive energy in life that you can plug into at any time and get your batteries charged. Ultimately, this becomes a problem between you and God, one of forgetting how to plug yourself in because, of course, God doesn't fail on his end, as your personal father may have. Discovering this connection and maintaining it is a function of several things. First, remembering to plug in. You can do this best with meditation. Remembering to remember to plug in. Staying plugged in. Mental discipline of a slightly different nature, which is the result of spiritual development. Such things as yoga, Unity Church, science of mind, metaphysics, tarot, the Kabbalah, systems that teach spiritual realities. And sustaining and building on the connection until it becomes a permanent part of your consciousness. Spiritual growth is going to be your most important goal and achievement in life. It's the most appropriate goal possible, in my opinion. It's the bridge you will walk across to the kinds of connections and communication that you want to have with others that you long for, including an intimate relationship that is long-lasting and trustworthy. Because of painful experiences with one's intuition in the past, or of being stifled or even disillusioned, those with Saturn and Sagittarius often cut themselves off from their feelings entirely, and the part of them that sees and perceives that life has meaning. This may bring difficulty in being optimistic about things. It's hard to be positive and optimistic about the future when you feel that life has no meaning. You need to develop faith and confidence both in yourself and in a higher power that can guide, nourish, and help you. Expand your willingness to dream and envision better things in life. Study religion, philosophy, and other subjects that enable you to see a larger, more inclusive view of yourself and the world. Be generous with your time, energy, and resources to help others achieve a better life, and this in turn will benefit you. Become more aware of the spiritual side of life, the underlying unity, by involving yourself in generous and charitable activities and by opening up your psychic channels. Meditation practices that develop your intuitive abilities and learning about the unseen side of life through your own dream experiences or altered states of awareness can be important steps in your path. Mental health is a major issue for those with a heavy Sagittarius or Gemini signature in their charts. As contrasted with depression and psychosis, which are water conditions, the sorts of problems that arise with Sagittarius energy are specifically conditions that result from trying to manage an unmanageable environment with the mind. Autism and schizophrenia are dramatic examples. Learning disabilities and hyperactivity are less dramatic examples. The nature of the problem could be described as an inability to regulate the amount of information which arrives at the brain for processing. In the case of autism, the mechanism seems to shut down. In learning abilities, frustration results along with confusion. In schizophrenia, the child may have been confronted with a split in the outer world, or the home environment. A good breeding ground for the kind of mental illness that manifests itself in the lives of many with Saturn and Sagittarius would be parents of different ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic, educational, or religious backgrounds, such that it would make it difficult to reconcile the split in the native's environment, coupled with a lack of a good mediator, such as the presence of an understanding grandparent who could help the child harmonize his environment. Colloquially, we like to say such things make us crazy, and indeed, such things do. In order to survive, the child may need to become two different people, or may only be around half the time. The famous mathematician John Nash was born with Saturn in Sagittarius. He was given the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1994. His story is well known to most Americans these days thanks to the book about his life and the movie based on that, called A Beautiful Mind, highlighting Nash's struggle with mental health. At his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, Nash indicated when he first noticed the symptoms of his paranoia around the time of his Saturn return. The mental disturbances originated in the early months of 1959 at a time when Alicia, his wife, happened to be pregnant. The birth of a child is quite a common occurrence around the time of one's late 20s, but it takes on special significance for someone with Saturn in Sagittarius, and it is usually the birth of the first child. This amounts to a serious curtailment of one's freedom, for it's the ultimate commitment to another human being. Huge challenges for a Saturn and Sagittarius person. Jackie Kennedy, who was born with this placement, gave birth to daughter Caroline during her first Saturn return. Ernest Hemingway became a father for the first time during his return, as did Charles Darwin, both sharing that same astrological placement. Abraham Lincoln made another kind of major personal commitment during his return when he met and married Mary Todd. When looking at the lives of other historical figures with Saturn and Sagittarius, one finds little evidence of spectacular or life-changing outer events or career happenings during this time. In fact, many famous people with this placement are dealing with the most mundane events or figuring out how to live their life after having achieved success right before the Saturn return. Michael Jackson's mediocre follow-up to Thriller, called Bad, appeared during his Saturn return. Hemingway struggled to complete A Farewell to Arms in 1928 during his Saturn return, in the shadow of the publication of The Sun Also Rises, the novel which established him as a literary star 2 years earlier. Love in the Time of Cholera was published the year before Gabriel Garcia Marquez's second Saturn return. Here's an example of what was happening in the careers of some pretty inspiring Saturn and Sagittarius individuals during their first Saturn return. Martin Luther King Jr. labored in the trenches of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference just after the Montgomery bus boycott ended. Abraham Lincoln was elected to the Illinois legislature. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was working as a film critic and writer on a newspaper. Mahatma Gandhi fought injustices in South Africa. And Jackie Kennedy was working as an editor for Doubleday and preparing for publication Michael Jackson's book, a project she found embarrassing and a huge headache. Charles Darwin published the journal from his journey on the Beagle and continued to work diligently on developing his theories, flooding local breeders with excessive questionnaires about their animals, while his new wife worried he would eventually leave the church as a result of his findings. These are all talented and inspiring individuals who didn't achieve much during the time of their Saturn return in terms of career. This period of time seems to operate as a point of personal consolidation and inner reflection rather than a period of accomplishment or real crisis. At least for those with Saturn and Sagittarius, I mean. In addition to finding a pattern of significant births and marriages in the lives of these individuals, one also notices that the Saturn return for someone with Saturn and Sagittarius might involve a major move. It was during his Saturn return that Hemingway left Paris, and it was at his second return, again occurring in the shadow of another accomplishment, this time the winning of the Nobel Prize for Literature, that he discovered many of the notebooks he kept while in France, and began writing A Movable Feast, which staved off his depression for a while and postponed what Hemingway seemed to regard as his inevitable suicide. Vladimir Lenin's Saturn return brought the end of his Siberian exile and his move to Europe. Usually one finds these people moving from city to country, or vice versa, or from one country to another. You may find that the places of your youth haunt you once you settle down in your new home, but this is as it should be, wrote Hemingway during his second Saturn return, recalling his life before 30. If you're lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life it stays with you, for Paris is a movable feast. The individual with Saturn and Sagittarius has the potential to inspire through a commitment to an ideal. I list some examples here of people who inspired others based on some ideal, and I'm not endorsing anyone in particular. I'm just giving some examples here. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Abraham Lincoln, Elie Wiesel, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Che Guevara, Osama bin Laden, Vladimir Lenin, Anne Frank, Ariel Sharon, Yasser Arafat, and Cesar Chavez. Those people, I think we could all agree, except for perhaps bin Laden and Lenin, maybe Sharon and Arafat. I think we can agree that these are inspiring people, even if we don't agree with their philosophy. That is what I meant to say. But when the energy is used negatively, people can become disillusioned and bitter. No idea or belief seems worthy of commitment or defense. And a good example of someone like this, who's actually someone I enjoy very much, is Bill Maher, who exhibits a type of cynicism, and he was born with Saturn and Sagittarius. And so was Noam Chomsky. The same thing with him. I think that he often embodies that kind of extreme cynicism And you may argue that these two are using it positively in their own way, but I think they don't seem to have an overarching philosophy of life that's positive and energizing. Even more extreme would be the rabid and insane rantings of Joseph Goebbels. That would be the worst use of Sagittarian energy, which can manifest itself as bigotry and racism. Someone who maybe is sort of in the middle would be Nabokov. He's got this tongue-in-cheek portrayal of a pederast in Lolita that is a wonderful book to read, and I think it's because you're never quite sure if Nabokov likes this pedophile or really thinks he's disgusting. Your Saturn return will be all about where you fall on this axis. Are you going to commit to something positive, or are you going to abandon your search and resolve to drown in a bitter and sordid worldview? That's really up to you. Someone who's been very inspiring to me in my life is Jackie Kennedy. At age 46, she began work as an editor. I think it would have been very easy for her, having been widowed twice, left to raise two children on her own who were constantly under death threat and who lived in this family, within the context of this family curse. She could have spent the last chapter of her life bitter and reclusive, or floating around the world as some kind of socialite living a sort of empty life. But she decided that she wanted to use her education and her talent and her energy to participate in an endeavor that she really believed in. And she committed herself fully to a life in New York. She dedicated herself to some important architectural causes, and she got a job as a book editor, which is a really unusual choice considering she certainly didn't need the money. To People magazine, her friend George Plimpton explained of Jackie's return to work, quote, "I sense a change in her. She's very much more like the girl I first knew, who had a great sense of fun and enthusiasm. It must be an electrifying, extraordinary thing for her to be on her own. She was always somewhat diminished by the men around her." End quotes. I think you can see there he's talking about her Leo energy, that sense of fun, but it's unleashed and tapped into in a positive way because of her decision to commit to something. In 1979, Jackie explained her decision herself in an essay in Ms. Magazine. "What has been sad for many women of my generation is that they weren't supposed to work if they had families. There they were, with the highest education, and what were they to do when the children were grown? Watch the raindrops coming down the window pane? Leave their fine minds unexercised? Of course women should work if they want to. You have to do something you enjoy. That is the definition of happiness. Complete use of one's faculties along the lines leading to excellence and a life according them scope. It applies to women as well as to men." There is a sense in the lives of people with Saturn and Sagittarius that the great struggle is inward. How does one be true to oneself while striking the compromises necessary to be effective in the world? The ultimate Sagittarian challenge is the lifelong journey on the road to knowing oneself. Do not be afraid, even at middle age or beyond, to finally commit to the ideals which energize you, whether those be religious, charitable, or artistic. Those with Saturn and Sagittarius must make commitments to loved ones, to the right causes, to their own personal development, and take leaps of faith in the evolution of society, or the individual, or even mankind itself, in the goodness of humanity, in the arts, and the ability of people to change and make peace. Do this, and eventually, gradually, through the magic of time, wisdom comes, and you will awake one day to find yourself the moral authority you dreamed of finding in someone else. I'll close now with a story about Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers, who was born with displacement. He was putting on a now forgotten puppet show during his first Saturn return, while also receiving theological training as a Presbyterian minister. Quietly and diligently, he spent the rest of his life carrying out his ministry for the children of America. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was in its 17th season in 1997 when Mr. Rogers won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Daytime Emmys. Tom Janot described the scene in an article in Esquire. Mr. Rogers went on stage to accept the award. And there, in front of all the soap opera stars and talk show sinceratrons, in front of all the jutting man-tan jaws and jutting saltwater bosoms, he made a small bow and said into the microphone, "All of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are?" 10 seconds of silence. And then he lifted his wrist, looked at the audience, looked at his watch, and said, "I'll watch the time." There was, at first, a small whoop from the crowd, a giddy, strangled hiccup of laughter, as people realized that he wasn't kidding, that Mr. Rogers was not some convenient eunuch, but rather a man, an authority figure who actually expected them to do what he asked. And so they did. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and now the jaws clenched, and the bosoms heaved, and the mascara ran, and the tears fell upon the beglittered gathering like rain leaking down a crystal chandelier. And Mr. Rogers finally looked up from his watch and said softly, "May God be with you," to all his vanquished children. So there you have it. Get married, have children, choose a place to live, work, in other words, settle down, and then get on with the business of inspiring the rest of us. Make the right compromises, and your life will be an especially happy one. Otherwise, you'll find yourself spiritually dead. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places, wrote Hemingway, but those that will not break it kills. Commit to life in all its mundane beauty and vicissitudes, and you will surely touch and inspire those around you, disseminating the wisdom to move us all ahead. I wish you a successful and prosperous Saturn return.